Can you hear me? Great. So, thank you all for coming. It's been 2.5 years since we've seen many of you. And we've been waiting for this day, I think, for a long time. At least I have been. And I see so many of familiar faces and familiar friends here who've sent emails or messages when are we restarting our events and when are we having more talks. And in a sense, I was waiting for the right moment. We were waiting for the right moment and waiting also for the right talk. And a few weeks ago, actually, where's the book? I got a parcel in the mail because I'd ordered a book. And when I opened it, literally my jaw dropped to the floor. I mean, there was no other reaction I had. And I found Robert's phone number in the book, and I messaged him. I said, Robert, I got your book. And he replied, is it damaged? And I said, no, it's just amazing. And it's such a beautiful piece of work. And I want to invite you here to Pune. And he said, thank God. So that's the story of how this talk began, the story of this talk. And I wanted to thank ASA for being part of this. This is as much an ASA event. So thank you so much to the committee for supporting our work and for being part of this. Thank you, Mahesh. Before we introduce Robert, I'd like our president, Pushkar Architect Kanvende, to please felicitate Robert. Just a small, yeah, that's for you. You come here. Just a small memento from us. So the evening will go like this. We'll have Robert share his work with us, and then we'll have a moderated conversation. I'll have a conversation with Robert, and then we'll have Q&A. So this is an introduction to Robert. After completing his Bachelor of Architecture degree from Virginia Tech in 2007, Robert Stevens left his childhood hometown in South Carolina and moved to Mumbai, India. He joined RMA Architects as an apprentice at the age of 22 and is now a principal at the same firm. In 2016, for those of you who don't know RMA Architects, RMA is one of India's best known architecture practices. So what Robert is showing here today is just his moonlighting, what he does after office hours, what his passion is about. And so this is not his full-time job, although it could seem like a full-time job. And I'm sure his wife would say that it's a full-time job. So it's good to put in perspective that this book is literally a labor of love that has happened over the last 6 or 7 years. And it's not what he does on a day-to-day basis. In 2016, he founded Urbs Indus, a studio that narrates lesser-known civic histories through the juxtaposition of archival material with contemporary aerial photographs of urban India. His work has been exhibited in Mumbai, Ahmedabad, Hyderabad, Chennai, and Edinburgh, and has appeared in publications such as The Guardian, Domus India, and Scroll. He currently lives in Mumbai with his wife, who's here with us, Tina, and their 6-year-old son. A little bit about the book. Beginning in 1670, Bombay Imagined, an illustrated history of the unbuilt city, tells the story of 200 unrealized urban visions, aspirations of an evolved metropolis, boasting everything from humane housing and expanded parks to sanitation systems and more. Ideas that never saw the light of day are richly illustrated with archival drawings, contemporary speculations, and artistic overlays, illuminating long-lost futures from the city's never-before-seen past. Bombay Imagined is a testimony to the audacious dreams of city lovers, a chronicle of untold narratives across centuries, and an insight into the tides that have shaped present-day Mumbai. Robert.
Thank you so much, Kushru, for this invitation. I'm really happy to see so many, I will consider all of you new friends now here this evening. Thank you to the ISA team who's supported as well. Lights, ho jayega na? Yeah, it'll just help the thing. So I'm going to share a bit about the book this evening. Kushru did give me a challenge. He said, speak for 60 minutes. Now, that's a long time. So I've tried to tailor the presentation to be an engaging 60 minutes so you won't fall asleep. I'm going to ask my wife at 50 minutes just to wave frantically, or anyone wants to wave frantically, feel free to do that. That's my 10-minute warning. And this book, I'm 37. It started when I was 30, and in all honesty, this has been one of the most enjoyable experiences of my life. It's in parallel with being married and having our son. So it's a really special book, object, experience, and I'm just going to kind of dive in, having said that. So Bombay Imagined began with another book, which you see on the screen, the Professional Papers on Indian Engineering. This is a publication that came out in many volumes. This volume was from 1869. And I was literally just, with no end goal in mind, no agenda, just browsing through this book. It's expansive. It's a series of engineering projects from the 19th century. And in this, there was a project by Hector Tulloch, a drainage proposal for Bombay. I love sanitation. It's a really fascinating subject, if you can read through a lot of the jargon. And, as I was reading this work, I came to this fold-out map. And it was beautiful. It's completely unexpected. And in the middle of this map is a big, is a big green blob, which you see here. And I was quite intrigued. Why would there be a big kind of amorphous green blob on a project, a proposal for drainage? And it turns out Hector Tulloch was, in this drainage scheme, he was describing kind of a side project, which he had discussed with a man by the name of Arthur Crawford. And this was a plan for a 400-acre park at Mahalakshmi. And it was beautiful, like what an idea, and to put this in context, at the time, this was kind of no man's land. It was actually, the green blob was the site of Bombay's first landfill. And in addition to the 400-acre park, Crawford said, let's have a statue of a fool in a cap. And below the fool in the cap, in 4 languages, will be the phrase, "Forgive us, for we know not what we did." And this was a statue dedicated to previous commissioners in Bombay who made this site a landfill, when actually he said it should have been a park. So it was a very kind of cunning idea, cunning plan. Really beautiful drawing. We'll come back to this. This is how Arthur Crawford described his vision: a people's park such as London does not possess. This is Crawford. This image is from the late 1880s. I love this scheme and this image because, when we think of Arthur Crawford, you often think of what? The market, right? Crawford Market. Or if you're into history, you think of corruption and scams. But Crawford was also just a Bombay citizen, and he had these incredible imaginations for the city. Many imaginations. I discovered this book he published in 1908 called The Development of New Bombay. Now, this was a fascinating title to me because, we often think of New Bombay, that phrase, as beginning in the 1960s. But as early as the 1870s, Arthur Crawford's thinking of the need for a new Bombay, and he produces this volume describing his ideas. For anyone interested in research methods, I found this on World Catalog. It's an online repository, and it tells you where books can be found. Now, this publication by Crawford, as far as I could tell on World Catalog, it was available in one library in the world, University of Minnesota. So I was nervous because there's just one place, and also excited. I wrote to them, said, "Do you have this book?" And they said, "Yes, we do. We'd be happy to send you a scan." I said, "Excellent, thank you very much." And then 2 days later, they wrote back and apologized. They could not find it anywhere on their shelves, and I was heartbroken because I was really excited. I love old books as well. So I then started searching, asking around in Bombay more, and turns out the book was at the Asiatic Library. I did the impossible, which 7 years ago, 7 years ago, was much harder than it is today. I became a member, and I'm member number 5266 at the Asiatic Library. Finally got in and found it. It's a little pamphlet, about A5 size. And of course, it's not to be issued out of the library. They allowed me to take a Xerox. And what I did, just to kind of keep myself inspired with research, I, with my mind, took an image of what the book looks like, and then I reproduced it in Photoshop. So this is my personal copy, but the book never left the library. And in this publication, Crawford, one of the many projects he describes is this vision for the Mumbai Devi Temple tank. It's from 1870. And he envisions the tank as becoming a place more beautiful and picturesque than the Place Vendôme in Paris. Ghat-like steps in black and white marble were to lead down to the water's edge, while gardens with seats were to bifurcate the descent. And what I love about this scheme is Crawford understands Bombay. He understands the residents. He knows tanks are not just repositories of water for physical nourishment. He knows they play a cultural role, they have a spiritual role to play, and he kind of puts all his energies out to beautifying these spaces. Of course, that didn't happen, and the tank was filled in many years later, and now it's a parking lot. So the book kind of, it took off. I found Crawford's plans, found many of his plans, started finding others, and I was really excited. Started collecting everything I could. I searched libraries around the world and just started building this portfolio that I called the manuscript. And I thought, great, we have all this research. In 2 or 3 years, the book will be done, and this was in 2016. It sat in my wardrobe, and it turned out it sat much longer than I expected because Tina and I were expecting our first child, our son, in 2016. And this was a really, really important personal moment, but it changed the course of the book as well. And I'll explain how in a bit. So we decided as a family we wanted 2 things with our son's birth. One, we wanted it to be at home. Okay, and we're a little crazy, but we're not completely crazy. So we said we want to have a home birth. We'll have a midwife, a doula, and a backup doctor. We found a team that would support us. That was set. Then we said we want to have a water birth, right? Which is what it sounds like. It's a birth in water. So on May 18th, Tina went into labor, and we set up the pool. Labor, started. It was slowly continuing, and then around 2 p.m. we got the doorbell rang, and I was annoyed, kind of disturbed. Who would be bothering us? Our son's about to be born, and I opened the door, and it's one of our security guards, and I'm not kidding. He says, "Saab, 5 baje sham se 7 baje subah pani nahi milega, kuch bhi nahi milega, cut, full water cut, 100%." And I completely freaked out. It was 2 o'clock at the time. We had 3 hours. So I just frantically started filling the pool. And fortunately, by 5 o'clock, we were able to fill the pool and have some drinking water. At 5 sharp, the water went dry. And later that evening, our son was born. So, this was it was a slow transition, but before his birth, the research at the time, it was called Bombay Unbuilt. It was a very serious, a very scholarly idea, and I thought it would become a book, but it was very serious. Then our son's birth happened, and life then became very playful and artistic. And fortunately, I was able to kind of combine these two over the next 6 years. So I think hopefully much of what you'll see combines these two aspects of the scholarly, serious, and the playful and artistic. So now let's dive into some projects. Speaking of water, 1845. Amongst the first requisites of a large and growing city is a plentiful supply of fresh and wholesome water. Right? 1845. In 2016, we felt that. Right? That moment when our security guard said, "Pani nahi milega," everything just goes for a toss. We have to have water for life, for our cities. So amongst the first plans to improve and develop Bombay's water supply was made by a man named Henry Conybeare. And he was a civil engineer, hydrologist. And what he said is, let's take all the hundreds of tanks in Bombay, in the island city, and let's convert them into tanks people can't access and put filtering wells. So you have to draw water from a bucket. Now that's a disaster, right? Because in Bombay, water is part of people's lives. It's not just something they drink and bathe in, which Crawford knew. Conybeare didn't capture that idea. So this was a disastrous idea, never happened for the better. All of those tanks, the filtering wells in the tanks, were in the island city. That was a disaster. Then he said, okay, let's look to Salsette, to the higher elevations, the hills of Bombay. And there he imagined 5 reservoirs. And he said, as the population grows, let's keep adding these reservoirs as per the city's need. And at any given time, every resident should have access to 20 gallons of water a day. Now, that was a huge amount at that time. Bombay's elite today use about 40 gallons a day, so he wasn't too far off in his estimation. For reference, in this yellow circle, that's Canary Caves, which you'll see next. 1868, about 15 years later, an engineer by the name of Russell Aitken says, okay, we need to expand Bombay's tanks, Bombay's reservoirs, and he proposes the Canary Reservoir, of course named after the caves nearby. This covered 500 acres, and it probably would have happened except the dam used to construct the reservoir would have been 136 feet high. It would have been the highest dam in the world at the time. Everyone said, including Arthur Crawford, it was just too risky. Now, one of the great things about Bombay, it's such a small space. If you don't solve a problem, it never goes away, and ideas just keep getting recycled. About a century later, 100 years later, the Dahisar Lake Reservoir is proposed, same location, same design. This would have covered 730 acres and submerged 200,000 trees. Of course, it also... It's a crazy reason it never happened. The government owned the land, and they were trying to charge themselves such high rates they couldn't even afford their own land. So it's a really twisted failure for the Dahisar Lake. Now, the problem with supplying water to Bombay is once water comes in, it's like a bathtub. Fine, you get water, congratulations, but now you have to get rid of it. And a large portion of Bombay is below sea level. So it's a real challenge getting water out. And engineers spent a lot of time trying to solve this problem as well. Russell Aitken, again, the same man who made that first Canary Reservoir plan, this was his imagination. What you see in the black arrows, that's the profile of the city. So you can kind of see the bathtub form of the center of the island. He says, I skipped an image. 1 second. One of my favorite projects. The computer skipped it. Sorry, first proposal for drainage. Let's take a dipper, basically, from the bathtub and throw the dirty water into the ocean. He proposed this big, Samuel Perks, he proposed this big Ferris wheel type thing that scoops water from the below sea level drain and then dumps it into a funnel that then discharges it to sea. Totally crazy idea. In the background, you can see faintly, that's Haji Ali for reference. Next proposal. So Perks says, let's throw it out like using a dipper. Russell Aitken says, no, let's pull the plug niche se. And if this is the city's profile, he says, let's take a 10-foot diameter drain below the city and then throw it out into the ocean by pumping it from a reservoir. He kind of found inspiration for this from Rome's Cloaca Maxima. It's about a 2,000-year-old drain in Rome. He thought it would work for Bombay. No one else did. Again, 1868, William Sowerby says, let's cut a channel through the center of Bombay from Back Bay to Mahim, 60 meters wide, 15 kilometers long. And nobody liked this, really. One of his kind of enemies, Hector Tulloch, held up his hands in horror at the idea of a canal passing through the heart of Bombay. I love his kind of passionate resistance to that plan. What you see in the horizontal hatches, that represents area below sea level. So you can see, the bathtub that Bombay is. It's a really disastrous place from an engineer's point of view. So imagine this is Bombay, right? The dirty water, the ocean, the Arabian Sea's outside. And I like to think the edges of the city are kind of like the rim of the bathtubs. You can imagine for a minute this circled part. Imagine that's Marine Drive, right? So let's just kind of browse along Marine Drive for a bit now. 1860, a really crazy plan by Robert Fairbairn. And I hope it's sharp enough here to see. He said, let's reclaim the complete area of Back Bay from Malabar Point to Colaba Point. It would have been the largest reclamation in Bombay's history. There would have been 17 miles of docks, a space for 1,300 ships. It was just really big. For reference, this little circle is Fort. If anyone knows the Fort District, this new piece of land that was to be made was 24 times larger. Beautiful drawing. This drawing's at the Asiatic Library in Bombay as well. Mr. Fairbairn's reclamation scheme is disposed of in about as many words as I opine there are subscribers for shares, so he didn't find much support. 1 year later, a gentleman by the name of William Walker comes up with a plan for Crescent and Promenade. He said from Chowpatty to Churchgate, he imagined a publicly accessible 30-meter wide landscaped promenade. And I really like this scheme because you'll see previous scheme, this huge reclamation. What you'll see next is another very large reclamation. Walker's much more sensitive. He says, let's just sculpt the city's existing boundary and give it to the people, right? A 30-meter wide promenade, double the width of Marine Drive today. Roughly, this is the extent of what he envisioned. The book is actually dedicated to William Walker. This is him. He first came to Bombay in 1820. He was about 20 years old at the time. He was just in transit. He came back in 1845 and stayed for 20 years. I think the prime of his life and kind of when he was really thinking about engineering and architectural solutions, he was in Bombay. There's 8 of his schemes are in the book, but I really like him. Yeah. 2 years later, the Back Bay Reclamation Scheme. This is again proposed by a private company, a group of individuals. And what you see in green, that crescent, that's 1,500 acres of to-be reclaimed land. Now, a part of this did happen, and this is what a local resident said: the profane hand of reclamative speculation has aimed a successful blow at a sacred beauty of nature, our Back Bay. And I love this description because you can see the residents love the island as it was, and then all these private individuals come and just start expanding and building, on the island. About 50 years later, we have another plan for another new Bombay, right? Crawford's first. Now we have this government plan, 1912, and 1912 is a really interesting year, right? Because New Delhi's being planned. Herbert Baker and Edwin Lutyens, of course, make the grand plan for New Delhi. New Bombay is simultaneous, and it looks very similar as well. There's a central vista, there's a government complex at the end. One of the really unique things, though, about New Bombay were these humongous parks. This is Churchgate Station, and the entire reclaimed land from Churchgate to Back Bay were to be huge public parks. This didn't happen. One economic scenario pegged the rupees 388 lakh scheme to be constructed on reclaimed land in 8 years as a profit-earning, debt-free asset by 2015. Right, so we'd have been 7 years in the plus now. Big failure. One resident was really upset when the New Bombay didn't happen. She's like, basically, she kind of did this and said, "I'm tired of receiving the stepmotherly treatment." New Delhi was getting all the attention, getting built, and New Bombay was just completely dropped. She was not happy. 1919, another Back Bay reclamation scheme by George Buchanan, and his plan was really quite simple. He said, from the harbor, let's dredge soft clay, let's pump it across the island of Colaba, little strip of land, and then let's dump it here on this new to-be reclaimed land. We'll build a seawall that will kind of act like a retaining wall and hold all this muck back. That was the plan, pretty simple. 2 problems with it. One, the seawall wasn't waterproof, so all the muck that was being picked from the ocean and dumped was just flowing back into Back Bay. It was like the Sisyphean disaster. The other problem, they thought the clay at the bottom of the harbor would be soft. It ended up being stiff. So all their efficiencies in dredging were completely haywire. This was just, it was a disaster through and through. It was left incomplete. In 1927, a resident said, "We are now condemned to gaze at something which, to put it in homely language, looks like nothing on earth." Right? 1927. This image is from 2017, almost 100 years later, and you can see that deficient retaining wall still floating in the middle of Back Bay, just as it was left in 1927. Quite crazy. 1921, so Buchanan was making the land William Davidge then made a layout, right? He was a town planner from London, and much like that 1912 plan, Davidge also imagined a central mall, this long central vista, but instead of, for vehicles, he imagined it as a green space, an urban mall. At the end, there was also a government complex, and this was the vision. When the reorganization contemplated under the scheme has taken place, Bombay will become one of the most orderly cities in the world. I love that imagination because I've been there for 15 years and it's chaos still. So it was really ambitious plans. 1928, the Back Bay International Airport. I love this plan because I think if it had happened, a lot of townies would just never go to the suburbs. They would never go. The plan was simple. The government was going to sell the aerodrome property at Juhu and build Bombay's International Airport at Back Bay, that little half-reclaimed piece of land, which is now Navy Nagar. There you can see the seawall, that leaking one, of course the runway, and then these were to be the parks, those large parks opposite Churchgate. This is a speculation. We'll talk a little bit more about speculations this evening. Of course, many of you will recognize Mr. Charles Correa. He also had visions for this failed Back Bay scheme. That's, again, just for reference, that's the leaking retaining wall. And much like William Walker in the 1860s, Charles Correa said, let's develop kind of these pieces of incomplete urban infrastructure, but not with reclamation. Let's just sculpt the edges of the incomplete Back Bay scheme and make it all public space, all social promenades, public institutions. It was a very admirable scheme. He said, let the bay in, don't, cut it off and just fill everything up. Now, of course, that was 1974. 1 year earlier, the government made this plan, and they basically, of course, said, let's reclaim everything and just chop it into a series of small blocks. We'll see there's a long history of chopping things into small blocks in Bombay, which we'll come to. There was a central park in this government plan. However, next to it, there was a helipad. So I like to think whoever designed this said the general public should really be blown away by the design. Now, we've taken that sweep of Marine Drive. Now let's walk a little bit inland to Churchgate. So of course, this is Churchgate. Opposite Churchgate today, many of you will know Eros Theatre, Oval Maidan, a little bit Terra there. William Davidge had this vision for the property opposite Churchgate, a grand legislative council. It was a huge, huge complex. And this is what happened. The dignified scheme was ruined by the grotesquely mistaken notion of a local advisory committee that the more small identical rectangles that could possibly be crammed into the area so reclaimed, the greater the return, of course in rupees, annas, and pies, rather than in the joy of living and of civic attractiveness. So that was Claude Batley. He was not happy with the development happening in Bombay. And of course, Claude Batley was also a practicing architect. One of his firm's schemes was for a marine aquarium. This was somewhere near Churchgate. I'm not sure exactly where. One of the highlights of this plan was there were to be 12 tanks. Each tank were to have fish from different layers of the ocean. And there were beautiful skylights and light filtering in and shadow. They describe it as dazzling. I think there were land constraints with that. Also, around the same time, same area, there were plans for a hygiene museum. So again, the land between Churchgate and Back Bay, you keep seeing these new ideas, new proposals. First, it's a large park. Now it's a series of 8 museums, one of which was this hygiene museum. It was to have a transparent man where the general populace could come learn about the human body without having to read text. They could just see. And that was meant to create this new understanding of health and well-being. The only missing component, rupees 50 lakh for construction, did not materialize, and the site was soon overrun by an array of residential and commercial Art Deco buildings. Now, Churchgate, again, fast forwarding. This is an image from the 70s. This junction's particularly close to my heart because whenever I go to office, I go from Churchgate, I cross this junction, and my wife says I'm not allowed to talk on the phone when I'm crossing because it can be life-threatening. It's been a problematic area for decades. And Charles Correa, this was his plan for the area outside Churchgate. He said, let's create a skywalk so all the pedestrians can, rise above the traffic, let the traffic flow freely below. The BEST had other plans. They said, let's do this long underground tunnel all the way from Churchgate to Flora Fountain. Neither happened. Continuing, the journey along to Gateway of India. George Whitted. So the first plan for Gateway, for a permanent structure, the Gateway of India, was by Whitted. He described it as the Gateway of India will stand out in shining white marble. There will be nothing like it along the harbor face, nothing that could compete with its pure brilliancy. And I love this imagination. Just imagine the Gateway of India, if it was just white marble, it would literally radiate. This was a model of his first scheme. And if you notice the orientation, right, it's parallel to the Taj Hotel. That was the first scheme. He then changed it. And he planned it with an avenue. And he says this, when I altered the alignment of the harbor front and arranged this scheme, it was with the distinct understanding that the buildings behind it, that is, the yacht club chambers and the block of flats immediately to the rear, would all be cleared away. And a fine processional avenue formed from the new gateway through to Esplanade Road, an avenue flanked by gardens and statuary. Right? So this grand vision of this processional avenue leading from the gateway. Now, there was one problem with this scheme. He wrote very eloquently about it, Whitted, but there were no drawings. And I'm a visual learner. I felt for a couple of months, I was quite sad. Had all these exciting plans, but no visual. So then Fawaz and I, you'll meet Fawaz a little later, we were brainstorming. We said, what if we create visuals? We take archival maps, we take these very vivid descriptions. What if we create visuals to illustrate what these individuals were imagining? And we did that, and I think it worked. This was the initial sketch for the Gateway of India Avenue, and I gave it to Aniket Umaria. He's a visualizer in Bombay, and this is what he made. And it's just a beautiful work of art, I think. And I like to think this is how George Whitted envisioned his Gateway of India Avenue, with statuary, with gardens, people just walking, under the treescape. Very beautiful space. The same time, so George Whitted's proposing Gateway in South Bombay. Same time, Patrick Geddes, a Scottish polymath, has this vision for a gateway leading to Bandra. So Whitted's in the south. Patrick Geddes says, let's frame the northern exit with another gateway. This is also Aniket's work. It's stunning. This is the Mahim Causeway. What I love about both of these proposals is they were made right after Whitted and Geddes returned from Ahmedabad. And for anyone who's been to Ahmedabad, right, the darwazas, the gateways of the old city are inspiring. They're brilliant. And these two men, they brought that back to Bombay, one of which happened in a certain incomplete way. And then, of course, the Bandra Gateway never happened. But beautiful ideas that they recycled from that visit. Now we'll end the project's kind of explorations at the Crescent site, right? This is the Crescent. It was a property at the south of Fort. It was created when Bombay's fort walls were demolished. 1860s, they were demolished, and then there's this big kind of enigmatic crescent-shaped empty plot. And for decades it sat, and there were many discussions. What should Bombay do with this monumental property? This was one idea in 1903. Jamshedji Tata imagined that the day was near when men could remain at their usual stations and work in a temperature regulated by artificial means. So Jamshed Tata said, let's use this site for an office building, in the center of which is an ice production factory, which will then cool the surrounding offices. He also envisioned a cultural venue with performances, plays, music, concerts. But the radical idea here was you don't have to retreat to the hills in the hot season. You can stay in one place, you can be comfortable. And this was 4 decades before air conditioners became, kind of novel in Bombay. Of course, this Didn't happen. Around the same time, Bombay's Christian community says, wow, this would be a really great plot for a grand cathedral, right? They considered St. Thomas Church as a nondescript church in a back lane and fort. So they said, let's build this grand cathedral. They said, to build a fine cathedral on the Crescent would be, from the aesthetic point of view, one of the best purposes in the interest of the city to which the site could be devoted. Now, unfortunately, they were just very poor, so that didn't work out. The man, this is Herbert Phipson, he was responsible for saying the Crescent should be the site of a museum, right? That's the Prince of Wales Museum today. So it's fully to his credit for identifying that. Before he came up with that idea, he was a little bit all over the place. He said, we should have a zoo at Malabar Hill. We would suggest as an admirable site for the proposed zoological gardens, the Chowpatty Cliff with all the broken ground and swampy land at the bottom. And again, he wrote vividly, no visual, so we made this with Aniket. It was to be an animal kingdom, Malabar Hill, right? I love it. In the background, the Stardeo, the mills, the black smoke, but Malabar Hill itself was the animal kingdom. In the bottom right, if you look closely, you can see a family of hippos. It's really beautiful work. This is Aniket. He's really, really talented. Other speculations in the book, there are 30 total, were made by Akil, an artist based out of Calicut, and then Yanis and Lambros, who were in Berlin and Athens. They were a superb team. Now, the Crescent, it's not, it's not an air-conditioned building. It's not a cathedral, right? It's a museum. So naturally, should have a competition. Competitions in Bombay are a disaster. 99% of the time, they don't work. So tread carefully if you apply for a competition in Bombay. There were 16 competitors for the Prince of Wales Museum, and this was the brief. In a great and busy hive of industry such as Bombay has become, it would be particularly refreshing to have one group of buildings which will not only provide quiet and restfulness within, but will even suggest it from without. Right? Nice brief. This was James Gibson's proposal. Beautiful fonts. Anyone who likes fonts, this is a special drawing. This was one analysis. His grasp of mass, line, form, and color is unsurpassed by any other competitor. However, Mr. Gibson is considered by the assessor to have shown himself perhaps the most able and artistic designer, though his scheme remains among the least acceptable for the purpose. James Miller, another entrant. This was his plan. Again, very regal. And here we go. Mr. James Miller Glasgow has been appointed architect of the Prince of Wales Museum, Bombay. So congratulations, Mr. Miller. Unfortunately, his award was revoked. And then, bizarrely, it was given to George Whitted, again, our gateway gentleman. So this was Whitted's first scheme. Very different from what he eventually came up with, which is bizarre. This is what the assessor said. Its appearance is somewhat against it. It does not look like a museum. The treatment adopted suggests something between a college and a monastery. Right? This was the official critique. So they forced him. They said, you've won the competition, but you have to change the design completely. Doesn't make any sense, but that's what happened. This was the museum block, the main kind of central building. This is what's built today. It was the only original Whitted structure that was completed. He envisioned an industries building on the west and then a natural history museum on the right. Industries was to be first, natural history last, because they said natural history has very little practical application in life. That was their analysis of priorities. And this was Whitted's own critique of what happened. As the building now stands, it is a torso and can never be satisfactory until its two wings are built and the group completed. Now, of course, the group would never be completed and it remains a torso today. John Begg, the man who said he didn't like the scheme, says this at Whitted's eulogy. The original competition design was greatly preferred. It was more original, more Whitted, pure Whitted. So I take from this, if anyone in the audience is a client and you have architects who come with really passionately with schemes, consider their schemes. Maybe don't jump just yet, because John Begg regretted his analysis at George Whitted's eulogy. Again, about 60 years later, Charles Correa now enters the Crescent, and he has a plan for a museum of modern art. This was his model, and you can see, of course, the torso, the main building with the dome, and then you see all the trees that surround the heritage building. And this was one analysis from the Times of India: a commercial plaza which would mean sacrificing greenery and involve the felling of trees. It's pretty harsh. This is April 15th, okay? 6 days later, inquiries showed that the facts contained in our story entitled Commercial Eyes on Museum Garden are not correct. The error is regretted. Okay, it was fake news, basically. And they corrected themselves. What Mr. Correa had actually suggested is an art gallery with a souvenir shop and a bookshop which would not mar the existing beauty of the Prince of Wales Museum, but would fit into the ambience of the area. And it's crazy, right? It's fake news. With words, the entire plan was undone, and it never generated enough momentum to be realized. And words are really powerful. So I'm going to share a little bit about what I call the architecture of the written word. What are the influences in the writing in Bombay Imagined? Some of you may have heard of this book, Writing Badly is Easy. It's one of my favorite books in the world by Amitabha Kumar. With this book, he made me fall in love with writing. Okay, and he made it easy. He made it enjoyable. When I downloaded this image from his website, this was how he saved this image photograph, jargonslayer2.jpg, right? Jargon Slayer, right? You find jargon, you slay it. I love it. Keep writing simple. Keep it fun. Get rid of the jargon. Good writing is full of surprises. It's full of humor. These were some of the principles that I learned through his book, and I hope it carried through Bombay Imagined. Now, through Amitabha Kumar's book, I met Anton Chekhov, who was a playwright and short story writer, and I consider him really my mentor in the writing of this book. And he had 6 principles that make for a good story, right? And Bombay Imagined is just 200 stories, just a series of stories, nothing more. The first principle: absence of lengthy verbiage of a political, social, economic nature, right? That for me was easy because in college I never attended classes other than studio, so I'm incapable of doing this. So that was quite easy. The second aspect was total objectivity. I don't share my feelings or ideas in the book. I don't say, oh, this scheme was bad, this scheme was good. It is what it is, and this is how other people reacted to it. This is why it didn't happen, etc. Truthful descriptions of persons and objects. I really love truthfulness. It can be challenging, but I really enjoy it. There are about between, I think, 600 and 700 footnotes in Bombay Imagined. And I put the footnotes because, one, I wanted people like myself who love research and archives to be able to go find the source material. But I also wanted people just to be sure I wasn't making a lot of this up, because some of it sounds so crazy, you would think it's made up. But if it sounds crazy, the source is there. It's truthful. Extreme brevity. Every chapter in the book was written between 5 a.m. and 7 a.m. That was my time, so therefore it was brief, no more than 200 words per project. Audacity and originality is what it is, and compassion. This is the hard one. I don't yet understand what it means to be a compassionate writer. I would love insights if anyone here has any. I wrote for 200 days straight. This was basically lockdown writing. And it was so much fun. I loved every minute. When we launched the book in March, I cried at the opening because I was just sad it was done. So I wrote for 200 days, loved every minute. Every word was first handwritten on these A3 size notepads. My handwriting's a mess. I was very, very fortunate. Bonnie Stevens went over every word in the book after I wrote it. So she really, was quite committed and faithful. I also had a great copy editing team, Khurshid Debu. She read Bombay Imagined at least 6 or 7 times, and every time she found mistakes. So she was a fantastic supporter. Kate Chalet, she created the index, and I love indexes. So we made 3. One was a general word index, one was a places index, and then people and institutions. So anyone who really gets passionate about an index, this book's for you. Deshna Mehta and Carol Nair, they created what I call the architecture of Bombay Imagined. So they're designers, book designers, graphic designers, all of that. And I gave them this as a brief. I said, we want to create this kind of book that has 200 projects, and each project has all this information. Please make sense of it, make it beautiful, make it balanced, calm. And they took all of this brief, and here's what they created. This is the architecture. So everything's chronological. So it starts with the year, the title. Here it's the Versova suburbs, the creator. Then what we call the relief map. So you know where in the island of Bombay this project was proposed. It kind of functions like a flip book if you just do that. Then these are what we call typologies, right? So say you're passionate about parking. You can choose to read projects only about Bombay's unbuilt parking history, one after the other. The page numbers are at the bottom in the matrix. Or say you love parks, you can read about Bombay's unbuilt park history in a very focused manner, skipping over the other projects. Then, of course, the main text, 150 to 200 words, very brief. The footnotes, to keep it truthful. And then what we call a pull quote, which is just something we found exciting. And then an image, right? Every project has an image, and I love images. Kshitij Mahashabde and Rimshi Agarwal, they made the relief maps. Rimshi did the research, Kshitij did the modeling, and they created from 1670 to 2022 these maps of the city, and just showing how the geography has changed and where projects evolve on the island city through time. They're really beautiful maps. They're super small in the book, but they're very, very detailed. Fawaz Khan. Fawaz was the project manager. I wrote to him in, I think it was June 2020. I said, let's work together for 4 months and make some graphics. We worked together for 2 years, and he managed the book. Without Fawaz, Bombay Imagined would not exist. He did all kinds of crazy stuff. He made this matrix, we call it, has every detail of every project, and it really helped us organize things. He did all the initial layouts, which we then gave to Deshna and Carol to really balance and fine-tune. He also did speculations, and he also created what we call overlays. So as you may remember, I like to take aerial photographs. So this was an aerial photograph of Bombay from 2013, and then Fawaz overlaid the Worli-Neriman Point sea link on this image. So Fawaz was just multi-talented and really was fabulous, really grateful to him. Now, that was all design, right? These are things stuck in a computer. You have to make a physical object at the end of the day. And so that's the creation. And this, for me, was the surprise. This was the super exciting part. Bonnie, again, she went over everything in the production phase as well. Very, very diligent. Our son let me use his magnet tiles for these sample prints. So thank you, Kai. Then we got into production, and it's a big team. Making a book is a big, big deal. Devin Shah and Leena Mehta I consider them like project managers. They designed how the book would be produced. They didn't actually produce it. They designed every aspect of the physical production. Praveen Totre, he runs the press at Ghatkopar, where it was printed, bound, everything. So all the equipment, the skilled team, he put them together and just under one roof, basically. And he's a really cool guy. Every time I met him, he would do this, even if he was stressed. This is the press. It's an offset machine, Heidelberg press. Each of these dabbas has a different ink color in it. It's a really beautiful process. And to see 1,500 books stacked up before they're bound is overwhelming. The camera couldn't get all of it, but it's really powerful. Did you know books cure? I did not know that. Fortunately, we have many engineers and architects in here. So same way concrete cures in a building, books cure. So the spine of every book has an adhesive added to it, this cloth called buckram, and then for 24 hours it sits. You can't do anything. And then after that 24 hours, the binding process continues. So this is part of that process. Leena and Devin designed these aspects and the timelines, how long it has to cure. their goal was this book should last hundreds of years. And yeah, really, really grateful for their expertise. Now, before we printed, I was nervous. I said to Deshna, what if something goes wrong? What if there's a computer glitch or a machine glitch, something goes wrong? Will we lose all our money? Because we self-published. It was like the biggest investment of our lives. And she said, oh, don't worry. It's all mechanized. Oh, okay, good. It's mechanized. Then we get to the workshop. There are nearly 24 people working with their hands. And I said, Deshna, with all due respect, kuch bhi, every book is handcrafted. It is a work of art. And you see the team, like here they're making a cover. They're using their hands. They're using, their focus, their full mental and physical attention into this production. And I was overwhelmed. I think this is why publishers do what they do. They want to be part of this. They don't want to share the joy of this with others. So we took it and did it ourselves. It was a really, really incredible experience. So every book you see, we have some out here tonight. Each one is handcrafted. This was Shah Alam Sheikh. He ran the binding team. Here these books are dangling there. That's part of the curing process. Fascinating. And then this team is just hand setting. Now what he's done here, he's making, of course, the cover. And then after he did that, the cover would go to debossing. And this was the debossing die. Even this, such a beautiful object. It's about this big. It's really small, but a fabulous work of art in and of itself. The title's debossed because it was meant to just kind of lend itself to this idea of the unbuilt, right? It's there, but it's also not there. The title doesn't exist. It's not a print. It's meant to be a bit mystical. This was not even the entire team. This was part of the production team. They're just rock stars. If anyone wants to produce a book in here, please do it with Indra Prasht and this team in Ghatkopar. Each book is hand numbered, one of 1,500. It comes in a box. The box making process was also a lot of fun. That's another talk. And the box though is one, so it doesn't get damaged. I'm really glad you got your book, Khushru. I was nervous. But also so you can keep it in your house in the box so dust doesn't ruin the top, right? Often dust settles on the top of books and I end up doing this and ruining the top pages. So keep the box. It's good to repel against dust. This is our living room. As I mentioned, we self-published, which means we don't have like some big shed where we just keep all of this. Our living room is part of our shed. Bonnie keeps on top of it, fortunately. Tina, of course, my wife, has done everything after the book was physically produced. Everything she did: book trailer, website, online shop, logistics of shipping, Instagram. She's doing it all. So thanks Bubs for that. And then Kaidav, of course, has been supporting us throughout, although he does call it the dumb Bombay book because it takes up his living room space, which, as you can see, the skateboard on the bottom left, it's really his space to play. So he's loaning the space to us to store books. So we have 18 books here today. Please, we really don't want to take any back to Bombay. Otherwise, Kaidav will not be happy. So please consider supporting and buying. Here are a few sample images of what was finally produced with a fabulous, fabulous team. And this is Bombay Imagined. Thank you all very much.